Hey, hey. So we are live with another experimental live read. Welcome to Adult Brain. I'm Graham, one of the narrators. Um, let's see here. Running like a minute late here, so I'm scrambling a little bit. This is going to be chapter 5 of part 4, Biela's Comet. My assistant taught me today that the pronunciation that they gave me before was wrong. They were hallucinating before. Now it sounds like it's Biela, not Biela, but this is part 4, the last part of Ignatius Donnelly's 1883 book called Ragnarok, The Age of Fire and Gravel. It's way better book than I expected it to be. I'm pretty happy with it. We went through parts 1, the drift, part 2, the comet, part 3, the legends, and now we are in conclusion. So after today, there's like 3 more chapters, so we'll probably be done this week. And yeah, I'm going to show you how it's done. This is how the sausage is made. We are humans, not robots here. I'm going to share my entire other little screen. This is kind of, it's not how I would do it by choice, but to do it live, I got to use small screens here. So this is my recording software, and this is the PDF here. So this is like raw and uncut. Basically, I'm editing as I go, so hopefully I won't make too many mistakes, and hopefully I won't cough and sputter too much. And we'll just show you how it's done. Figured we might as well try it, see what's going to go on. I have to keep an eye on that record level there. So let's jump into it. I'm just going to do a quick test here. Check. Seems to be working. And we'll go. Chapter 5, Biela's Comet. Humboldt says, "It is probable that the vapor of the tails of comets mingled with our atmosphere in the years 1819 and 1823. There is reason to believe that the present generation has passed through the gaseous prolongation of a comet's tail, and that hundreds of human beings lost their lives, somewhat as they perished in the age of fire and gravel, burned up and poisoned by its exhalations. And although this catastrophe was upon an infinitely smaller scale than that of the old time, still it may throw some light upon the great cataclysm. At least it is a curious story with some marvelous features. On the 27th day of February, 1826, to begin as Monsieur Dumas would commence one of his novels, Monsieur Biela, an Let me redo that guy. I gotta catch my breath and relax a bit here. Monsieur Biela, an Monsieur Biela. So why do they call Austrians Monsieur instead of Mr.? Monsieur Biela, an Austrian officer residing at Josephstadt. Monsieur Biela, an Austrian officer residing at Josephstadt in Bohemia, discovered a comet in the constellation Aries, which at that time was seen as a small round speck of filmy cloud. Its course was watched during the following month by Monsieur Gambart at Marseille and by Monsieur Clausen at Altona, and those observers assigned to it an elliptical orbit with a period of 6 years and 3/4 for its revolution. Monsieur Damaso. Excuse me. Monsieur Damaso subsequently calculated its path and announced that on its next return, the comet would cross the orbit of the Earth within 20,000 miles of its track, and but about 1 month before the Earth would have arrived at the same spot. This was shooting close to the bullseye. He estimated that it would lose nearly 10 days on its return trip through the retarding influence of Jupiter and Saturn. But if it lost 40 days instead of 10, what then? But the comet came up to time in 1832, and the Earth missed it by 1 month. And it returned in like fashion in 1839 and 1846. But, it's slipping down. Why is it slipping down? But here a surprising thing occurred. Its proximity to the Earth had split it in two. Each half had a head and tail of its own. Each had set up a separate government for itself, and they were whirling through space side by side like a couple of racehorses about 16,000 miles apart, or about twice as wide as. Okay, I'm going to redo that so I don't start halfway through the sentence. And they were whirling through space. And they were whirling through space side by side like a couple of racehorses about 16,000 miles apart, or about twice as wide apart as the diameter of the Earth. Here is a picture of them drawn from life. I'm going to stop there just so we can look at this a little bit. This is Biela's Comet, split in two, from Gilliman's The Heavens, page 247. Nice. Now we're going to get back to the legends a little bit. Did the Fenris wolf, the Midgard serpent, and the dog Garm look like this? In 1852, 1859, and 1866, the comet should have returned, but it did not. It was lost. It was dissipated. Its material was hanging around the Earth in fragments somewhere. I quote from a writer in a recent issue of the Edinburgh Review. The puzzled astronomers were left in a state of tantalizing uncertainty as to what had become of it. At the beginning of the year 1866, this feeling of bewilderment gained expression in the annual report of the Council of the Royal Astronomical Society. The matter continued, nevertheless, in the same state of provoking uncertainty for another 6 years. Let's scroll up a bit, take a break. The third period of the perihelion passage had then passed, and nothing had been seen of the missing luminary. But on the night of November 27th, 1872, night watchers were startled by a sudden and very magnificent display of falling stars or meteors, of which there had been no previous forecast. And Professor Klinkerfues of Berlin, having carefully noted the common radiant point in space from which this star shower was discharged into the Earth's atmosphere, with the intuition of ready genius, jumped at once to the startling inference that here at last were traces of the missing luminary. There were 80 of the meteors that furnished a good position for the radiant point of the discharge, and that position, strange to say, was very much the same as the position in space which Biela's comet should have occupied just about that time on its fourth return toward perihelion. Hello, Satarudra. Nice to see you here again. We'll start at Klinkerfues. Klinkerfues, therefore, taking this spot as one point in the path of the comet and carrying the path on as a track into forward space, fixed the direction there through which it should pass as a vanishing point at the other side of the starry sphere. And having satisfied himself on that further position, he sent off a telegram to the other side of the world, where alone it could be seen, that is to say, to Mr. Pogson of the Madras Observatory, which may be the best told in his own nervous and simple words. Herr Klinkerfues' telegram to Mr. Pogson of Madras was to the following effect. Is it Madras? 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 Madras, I think. Do I have to check that? Madras. It just sounds stupid if I'm getting that wrong. It's such a popular word, but Madras, I think. Madras? My assistant is checking Madras. Yeah, Madras, not Madras. Okay, let me go back to it here. Herr Klinkerfues. Herr Klinkerfues. Where if I go to back? Klinkerfues telegram. Yeah, let's do Madras. Herr Klinkerfues' telegram to Mr. Pogson of Madras was to the following effect. November 30th. Biela touched the Earth on the 27th of November. Search for him near Theta Centauri. The telegram reached Madras through Russia in 1 hour and 35 minutes, and the sequel of this curious passage of astronomical romance may be appropriately told in the words in which Mr. Pogson replied to Herr Klinkerfew's pithy message. The answer was dated Madras, the 6th of December, and was in the following words. On the 30th of November at 16 hours, the time of the comet rising here, I was at my post, but hopelessly. Clouds and rain gave me no chance. The next morning I had the same bad luck. But on the third trial, with a line of blue break about 17 and a quarter hours meantime, I found... I burped. Let me start from there. I'm going to scroll up, keep it at the top, so that I can hopefully read the whole page without having to scroll when I'm reading. Oh, excuse me. Brings up stuff. But on the third trial, with a line of blue break about 17 and a quarter hours meantime, I found Biela immediately. Only 4 comparisons in successive minutes could be obtained in strong morning twilight with an anonymous star, but direct motion of 2.5 seconds decided that I had got to the comet all right. I noted it, circular, bright, with a decided nucleus but no tail, and about 45 seconds in diameter. Next morning, I got 7 good comparisons with an anonymous star, showing a motion of 17.9 seconds in 28 minutes. And I also got 2 comparisons with a Madras star in our current catalog, and with 7,734 Taylor. I was too anxious to secure one good place for the one in hand to look for the other comet, and the 4th morning was cloudy and rainy. Herr Klinkerfew's commentary upon this communication was that he forthwith proceeded to satisfy himself that no provoking accident had led to the discovery of a comet, altogether unconnected with Biela's, although in this particular place, and that he was ultimately quite confident of the identity of the comet observed by Mr. Pogson, with one of the 2 heads of Biela. It was subsequently settled that Mr. Pogson had most probably seen both heads of the comet, one on the first occasion of his successful search, and the second on the following day. And the meteor shower experienced in Europe on November 27th was unquestionably due to the passage near the Earth of the meteoric tail traveling in the track of the comet. When the question of a possible collision was mooted in 1832, Sir John Herschel remarked that such an occurrence might not be unattended with danger, and that on account of the intersection of the orbits of the Earth and the comet, a rencontre would rencontre. I gotta check that. Sorry, rencontre. Contra. See what my assistant says about that. He's there waiting for me to ask him about this book. Of the intersection of the orbits. Ron contra. So not Ren contra, but Ron contra. Ron contra. Okay, let's see. Go back here. I'm just going to redo that one again. Where am I? Sir John. Oh, this is going to be a long one. Sir John Herschel. I'll just do that whole thing again. Check. When the question of a possible collision was mooted in 1832, Sir John Herschel remarked that such an occurrence might not be unattended with danger, and that on account of the intersection of the orbits of the Earth and the comet, a rencontre would in all likelihood take place within the lapse of some millions of years. As a matter of fact, the collision did take place on November 27, 1872, and the result, so far as the Earth was concerned, was a magnificent display of aerial fireworks. But a more telling piece of ready-witted sagacity than this prompt employment of the telegraph for the apprehension of the nimble delinquent can scarcely be conceived. The sudden brush of the comet's tail, the instantaneous telegram to the opposite side of the world, and the glimpse thence of the vagrant luminary as it was just whisking itself off into space toward the star Theta Centauri, together constitute a passage that stands quite without a parallel in the experience of science. But did the Earth escape with a mere shower of fireworks? I have argued that the material of a comet consists of a solid nucleus giving out fire and gas enveloped in a great gaseous mass, and a tail made up of stones, possibly gradually diminishing in size as they recede from the nucleus, until the after part of it is composed of fine dust ground from the pebbles and boulders. While beyond this, there may be still a further prolongation into gaseous matter. Now we have seen that Biela's comets lost their tails. What became of them? There is no evidence to show whether they lost them in 1852, 1859, 1866, or 1872. The probabilities are that the demoralization took place before 1852, as otherwise the comets would have been seen, tails and all, in that and subsequent years. It is true that the Earth came near enough in 1872 to attract some of the wandering gravel stones toward itself, and that they fell blazing and consuming themselves with the friction of our atmosphere, and reached the surface of our planet, if at all, as cosmic dust. But where were the rest of the assets of these bankrupt comets? They were probably scattered around in space, disjecta, membra, floating hither and thither, in one place a stream of stones, in another a volume of gas, while the two heads had fled away like the figurative presidents of a couple of broken banks to the Canadian refuge of Theta Centauri, shorn of their splendors and reduced to first principles. Did anything out of the check. Did anything out of the usual order occur on the face of the earth about this time? Yes. In the year 1871, on Sunday, the 8th of October, at 9:30 in the evening, events occurred which attracted the attention of the whole world, which caused the death of hundreds of human beings and the destruction of millions of property, and which involved 3 different states of the Union in the wildest alarm and terror. The summer of 1871 has been excessively dry. Climate change back then. The summer of 1871 had been excessively dry. The moisture seemed to be evaporated out of the air, and on the Sunday above named, the atmospheric conditions all through the Northwest were of the most peculiar character. The writer was living at the time in Minnesota, hundreds of miles from the scene of the disasters, and he could never forget the condition of things. There was a parched, combustible, inflammable, furnace-like feeling in the air that was really alarming. It felt if it... Scroll up a little bit, get it to the top. It felt as if there were needed but a match, a spark, to cause a worldwide explosion. It was weird and unnatural. I've never seen nor felt anything like it before or since. Those who experienced it will bear me out in these statements. At that hour, 9:30 in the evening, at apparently the same moment, at points hundreds of miles apart in 3 different states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Illinois, fires of the most peculiar and devastating kind broke out, so far as we know, by spontaneous combustion. In Wisconsin, on its eastern borders, in a heavily timbered country near Lake Michigan, a region embracing 400 square miles extending north from Brown Country and containing Peshtigo, Manistee, Holland, and numerous villages on the shores of Green Bay, was swept bare by an absolute whirlwind of flame. There were 750 people killed outright, besides great numbers of the wounded, maimed, and burned who died afterward. More than $3 million worth of property was destroyed. It was no ordinary fire. I quote, "At sundown there was a lull in the wind and comparative stillness. For 2 hours there were no signs of danger. But at a few minutes after 9:00, and by a singular coincidence, precisely the time at which the Chicago fire commenced, the people of the village heard a terrible roar. It was that of a tornado crushing through the forests. Instantly the heavens were illuminated with a terrible glare. The sky, which had been so dark a moment before, burst into clouds of flame. A spectator of the terrible scene says the fire did not come upon them gradually from burning trees and other objects of the whirlwind, but the first notice they had of it was a whirlwind of flame in great clouds from above the tops of the trees, which fell upon and entirely enveloped everything. The poor people inhaled it, or the intense. Let me check that out. I don't know why that goes down. Let's see here. The poor people inhaled it, or the intensely hot air, and fell down dead. This is verified by the appearance of many of the corpses. They were found dead in the roads and open spaces, where there were no visible marks of fire nearby, with not a trace of burning upon their bodies or clothing. Sorry, I got to redo that one. Yep. Where there were no visible. They were found. Check. They were found dead in the roads and open spaces where there were no visible marks of fire nearby and not a trace of burning upon their bodies or clothing. At the Sugar Bush, which is an extended clearing in some places 4 miles in width, corpses were found in the open road between fences only slightly burned. No mark of fire was upon them. They lay there as if asleep. This phenomenon seems to explain the fact that so many were killed in compact masses. They seem to have huddled together in what were evidently regarded at the moment as the safest places, far away from buildings, trees, or other inflammable material, and there to have died together. Another spectator says, much has been said of the intense heat of the fires which destroyed Peshtigo, Menaconi, Williamsville, etc. But all that has been said can give the stranger but a faint conception of the reality. The heat has been compared to that engendered by a flame concentrated on an object by a blowpipe. But even that would not account for some of the phenomena. For instance, we have in our possession a copper cent taken from the pocket of a dead man in the Peshtigo sugar bush, which was illustrate. Do I go back? Yes, I should. But even that. I've lost my place. Oh, there we go. Let me just redo that quickly. Let's see here. But even that would not account for some of the phenomena. For instance, we have in our possession a copper cent taken from the pocket of a dead man in the Peshtigo sugar bush, which will illustrate our point. This cent has been partially fused, but still remains. Check. This cent has been partially fused, but still retains its round form, and the inscription upon it is legible. Others in the same pocket were partially melted, and yet the clothing and the body of the man were not even singed. We do not know in what way to account for this unless, as it is asserted by some, the tornado and fire were accompanied by electrical phenomena. It is the universal testimony that the prevailing idea among the people was that the last day had come. Accustomed as they were to fire, nothing like this had ever been known. They could give no other interpretation to the scroll up here. Check. They could give no other interpretation to this ominous roar, this bursting of the sky with flame, and this dropping down of fire out of the very heavens, consuming instantly everything it touched. No two give a like description of the great tornado as it smote and devoured the village. It seemed as if the fiery fiends of hell had been loosened, says one. It came in great sheeted. Sheeted flames must be. This sounds like a tornado fire. It came in great sheeted flames from heaven, says another. There was a pitiless rain of fire and sand. The atmosphere was all afire. Some speak of great balls of fire unrolling and shooting forth in streams. The fire leaped over roofs and trees and ignited whole streets at once. No one could stand before the blast. It was a race with death above, behind, and before them. A civil engineer doing business in Peshtigo says, the heat increased so rapidly as things got well afire that when about 400 feet from the bridge and the nearest building, I was obliged to lie down behind a log that was aground in about 2 feet of water. And by going underwater now and then and holding my head close to the water behind the log, I managed to breathe. There were a dozen others behind the same log. If I had succeeded in crossing the river and gone among the buildings on the other side, probably I should have been lost, as many were. Just a reminder, this was 1871. Fire happening in 3 different states all at once when Biela the Comet was seen overhead. We have seen Ovid describing the people of the earth crouching in the same way in the fire to save themselves from the flames of the age of fire. In Michigan, one Allison Weaver near Port Huron determined to remain to protect, if possible, some mill property of which he had charge. He knew the fire was coming and dug himself a shallow well or pit, made a thick plank cover to place over it, and thus prepared to bide the conflagration. I quote, he filled it nearly full of water and took care to saturate the ground around it for a distance of several rods. Going to the mill, he dragged out a 4-inch plank, sawed it in two, and saw that the parts tightly covered the mouth. Going to the mill. Let me try that again. Going to the mill, he dragged out a 4-inch plank, sawed it in two, and saw that the parts tightly covered the mouth of the little well. I cockerated it, would be tack and go, said he, but it was the best I could do. At midnight he had everything arranged, and the roaring then was awful to hear. The clearing was 10 to 12 acres in extent, and Weaver says that for 2 hours before the fire reached him, there was a constant flight across the ground of small animals. As he rested a moment from giving the house another wetting down, a horse dashed into the opening at full speed and made for the house. Weaver could see him tremble and shake with excitement and terror, and felt a pity for him. After a moment, the animal gave utterance to a snort of dismay, ran 2 or 3 times around the house, and then shot off into the woods like a rocket. We have in the foregoing pages, in the legends of different nations, descriptions of the terrified animals flying with the men into the caves of the earth to escape the great conflagration. Not long after this fire came, Weaver stood by his well, ready for the emergency, yet curious to see the breaking in of the flames. The roaring increased in volume, the air became oppressive, a cloud of dust and cinders came showering down, and he could see the flame through the trees. It did not run along the ground or leap from tree to tree, but it came on like a tornado, a sheet of flame reaching from the earth to the tops of the trees. As it struck the clearing, he jumped into his well and closed over the planks. He could no longer see, but he could hear. He says that the flames made no halt whatever or ceased their roaring for an instant, but he hardly got the opening closed before the house and mill were burned tinder, and both went down in 5 minutes. The smoke came down upon him powerfully, and his den was so hot he could hardly breathe. He knew that the planks above him were on fire, but remembering their thickness, he waited till the roaring of the flames had died away, and then with his head and his hands turned them over and put out the fire by dashing up water with his hands. Although it was a cold night and the water had at first chilled him, the heat gradually warmed him up until he felt quite comfortable. He remained in his den until daylight, frequently turning over the planks and putting out the fire. And then the worst had passed. The earth around was on fire in spots. House and mill were gone. Leaves, brush, and logs were swept clean away, as if shaved off and swept with a broom, and nothing but soot and ashes were to be seen. In In Wisconsin, at Williamson's Mill, there was a large but shallow well on the premises belonging to a Mr. Borman. The people, when cut off by the flames and wild with terror and thinking they would find safety in the water, leapt into this well. The relentless fury of the flames drove them pell-mell into the pit, to struggle with each other and die, some by drowning and others by fire and suffocation. None escaped. 32 bodies were found there. They were in every imaginable position, but the contortions of their limbs and the agonizing expressions on their faces told the awful tale. The recital of these details, horrible though they may be, becomes excusable when we remember that the ancestors of our race must have endured similar horrors in that awful calamity which I have discussed in this volume. James B. Clark of Detroit, who was at Uniontown, Wisconsin, writes, "The fire suddenly made a rush like a flash of train of gunpowder and swept in the shape of a crescent around the settlement. It is almost impossible to conceive the frightful rapidity of the advance of the flames. The rushing fire seemed to eat up and annihilate the trees. They saw a black mass coming toward them from the wall of flame. It was a stampede of cattle and horses thundering toward us, bellowing, moaning, and neighing as they galloped on, rushing with fearful speed, their eyeballs dilated and glaring with terror, and every motion betokening delirium of fright." Gotta redo that. I made a mistake there. It was a stampede of cattle and horses thundering toward us, rushing. Check. Rushing with fearful speed, their eyeballs dilated and glaring with terror, and every motion betokening delirium of fright. Some had been badly burned and must have plunged through a long space of flame in a desperate effort to escape. Following considerably behind came a solitary horse, panting and snorting and nearly exhausted. He was saddled and bridled, and, as we first thought, had a bag lashed to his back. As he came up, we were startled at the sight of a young lad lying fallen over the animal's neck, the bridle wound around his hands and the mane being clinched by the fingers. Let me redo that. As he came up. Check. As he came up, we were startled at the sight of a young lad lying fallen over the animal's neck, the bridle wound around his hands and the mane being clenched by the fingers. Little effort was needed to stop the jaded horse and at once release the helpless boy. He was taken into the house, and all that we could do was done, but he had inhaled the smoke and was seemingly dying. Some time elapsed, and he revived enough to speak. He told his name, Patrick Burns, and said, "Father and mother and the children got into the wagon. I don't know what became of them. Everything is burned up. I am dying. Oh, is hell any worse than this?" How vividly does all this recall the book of Job and the legends of Central America, which refer to the multitudes of the burned, maimed, and wounded lying in the caverns, moaning and crying like poor Patrick Burns, suffering no less in mind than in body. When we leave Wisconsin and pass about 250 miles eastward over Lake Michigan and across the whole width of the state of Michigan, we find much the same condition of things, but not so terrible in the loss of human life. Fully 15,000 people were rendered homeless by the fires, and their food, clothing, crops, horses, and cattle were destroyed. Of these, 5,000 to 6,000 were burned out the same night that the fires broke out in Chicago and Wisconsin. The total destruction of property exceeded $1 million. Not only villages and cities, but whole townships were swept bare. But it is to Chicago we must turn for the most extraordinary results of this atmospheric disturbance. It is needless to tell the story in detail. The world knows it by heart. Blackened and bleeding, helpless, panting, prone, on the charred fragments of her shattered throne, lies she who stood but yesterday alone. I have only space to refer to 1 or 2 points. The fire was spontaneous. The story of Mrs. O'Leary's cow having started the conflagration by kicking over a lantern was proved to be false. It was the access of gas from the tail of Biela's comet that burned up Chicago. The fire marshal testified, I felt it in my bones that we were going to have a burn. He says, speaking of O'Leary's burn, we got the fire under control and it would not have gone a foot farther, but the next thing I knew, they came and told me that St. Paul's Church, about 2 squares north, was on fire. They checked the church fire, but the next thing I knew, the fire was in Bateham's planing mill. I should redo that. The next thing, planing mill. The next thing I knew, the fire was in Bateham's planing mill. A writer in the New York Evening Post says he saw in Chicago buildings far beyond the line of fire and in no contact with it burst into flames from the interior. It must not be forgotten that the fall of 1871 was marked by extraordinary conflagrations in regions widely separated. On the 8th of October, the same day, the Wisconsin, Michigan, and Chicago fires broke out. The states of Iowa, Minnesota, Indiana, and Illinois were severely devastated by prairie fires. Excuse me. Check. While terrible fires raged on the Alleghenies, the Sierras of the Pacific Coast, and the Rocky Mountains, and in the region of the Red River of the North, the Annual Record of Science and Industry for 1876, page 84, says, for weeks before and after the Great Fire in Chicago in 1872, great areas of forest and prairie land, both in the United States and the British provinces, were on fire. The flames that consumed a great part of Chicago were of an unusual character and produced extraordinary effects. They absolutely melted the hardest building stone, which had previously been considered fireproof. Iron, glass, granite were fused and run together into grotesque conglomerates, as if they had been put through a blast furnace. No kind of material could stand its breadth for a moment. I quote again from Sheehan and Upton's work. The huge stone and brick structures melted before the fierceness of the flames as a snowflake melts and disappears in water, and almost as quickly. 6-story buildings would take fire and disappear forever from sight in 5 minutes by the watch. The fire also doubled on its track. Check. The fire also doubled on its track at the Great Union Depot and burned half a mile southward in the very teeth of the gale. A gale which blew a perfect tornado and in which no vessel could have lived on the lake. Strange, fantastic fires of blue, red, and green played along the cornices of buildings. Honorable William B. Ogden wrote at the time, the fire was accompanied by the fiercest tornado of the wind ever known to blow here. The most striking peculiarity of the fire was its intense heat. Nothing exposed to it escaped. Amid the hundreds of acres left bare, there is not to be found a piece of wood of any description, and unlike most fires, it left nothing half burned. The fire swept the streets of all the ordinary dust and rubbish, consuming it instantly. The Athens marble burned like coal. The intensity of the heat may be judged, and the thorough combustion of everything wooden may be understood when we state that in the yard of one of the large agricultural implement factories was stacked some hundreds of tons of pig iron. This iron was 200 feet from any building. To the south of it was the river, 150 feet wide. No large building, but the factory was in the immediate vicinity of the fire. Yet, so great was the heat that this pile of iron melted and run, and is now in one large and nearly solid mass. The amount of property destroyed was estimated by Medill, Mayor Medill. The amount, let me just redo that. The amount of property destroyed was estimated by Mayor Medill at $150 million, and the number of people rendered houseless at 125,000. Several hundred lives were lost. All this brings before our eyes vividly the condition of things when the comet struck the Earth, when conflagration spread over wide areas, when human beings were consumed by the million, when their works were obliterated and the remnants of the multitude fled before the rushing flames, filled with unutterable consternation. And as they jumped pell-mell into wells, so we have seen them in Job clambering down ropes into the narrow-mouthed bottomless pit. Who shall say how often the characteristics of our atmosphere have been affected by accessions from extraterrestrial sources, resulting in conflagrations or pestilences, in failures of crops, and in famines? Who shall say how far great revolutions and wars and other perturbations of humanity have been due to similar modifications? There is a world of philosophy in that curious story, Dr. Ox's Hobby, wherein we are told how he changed the mental traits of a village of Hollanders by increasing the amount of oxygen in the air they breathed. Wow, what a cool chapter. That was great. The fires. Wow. So interesting compared to what we've seen lately. And next, tomorrow will be chapter 6, The Universal Belief of Mankind. I think there's only 3 chapters left, and we're almost done this whole book. If you want to hear the beginning part, the drift and the comet and all that other stuff from the beginning, go back to our live tab on our YouTube channel. And yeah, it's all there. And help support our work. Like and subscribe. You can find our books on Audible and Spotify and as well on YouTube here. So thank you very much for watching or listening, and we'll see you tomorrow. Love you.